The stars looked different when you knew monsters lived among them. Admiral Kijun stood on the bridge of his ship watching the endless black space that stretched between worlds. His crew worked quietly around him, checking weapons and running system tests. They all knew what was coming. The Vorthak Empire had sent word 3 days ago that they would broadcast something special across all the known worlds. The Vorthak ruled most of this part of the galaxy. They had been in power for 3,000 years and they liked to remind everyone about it. Their ships were bigger than human ships. Their weapons were stronger. Their empire covered hundreds of worlds while humanity only had a few dozen colonies scattered across nearby star systems. The Vorthak made sure everyone knew who was in charge. Kijun had been fighting small battles with Vorthak forces for 2 years now. Nothing big, just border disputes and trade arguments. The kind of conflicts that happened when a young species, like humanity, tried to expand into space that older empires considered theirs. He thought he understood how this war worked. He was wrong. The communication officer looked up from her station. "Admiral, the broadcast is starting." Her voice was steady, but Kijun could hear the worry underneath. They all knew the Vorthak liked to make examples of people who crossed them. The main screen flickered to life. A Vorthak announcer appeared, his gray skin marked with the ritual scars that showed his rank. Behind him stood a platform made of dark metal. 3 humans stood on that platform with ropes around their necks. Kijun felt his blood turn cold. Knew those faces. Minji stood in the center. She was 26 years old and had 2 small children back on the mining colony where she lived. Her crime was growing food in soil that the Vorthak claimed belonged to their empire. She had been feeding families whose children were starving because the empire took most of their crops as taxes. To her left stood Hana. She was a doctor who had been working to cure a disease that was killing colonists on 3 different worlds. The Vorthak said she was stealing medical supplies that should have gone to their own people first. She had saved hundreds of lives with those supplies. The youngest was Sola. She was only 18 and had been caught giving medicine to sick children whose parents could not afford to buy it from Vorthak traders. The Empire called this theft of imperial property. The announcer began to speak. His words were translated into human language by the ship's computer, but the cold pleasure in his voice needed no translation. "Citizens of the galaxy, today you will witness the fate of those who steal from the Vorthak Empire. These humans believed their soft hearts made them better than the law. They believed their emotions gave them the right to take what was not theirs." Kijun watched Minji's face on the screen. She was not crying. She looked directly at the camera with calm eyes that seemed to see right through the lens to everyone watching. Hana stood straight and proud like the doctor she was. Sola was scared, but she did not beg or weep. "The human species is weak," the announcer continued. "They care too much about individual lives to understand the greater good of galactic order. They will never be more than a minor species because they cannot make the hard choices that true rulers must make." The camera moved, closer to show the 3 women's faces. The Vorthak wanted everyone in the galaxy to see this moment. They wanted fear. They wanted other species to remember what happened when you opposed their will. But as Kijun looked at those 3 faces, he did not feel fear. Something much darker was growing in his chest. Around the bridge, he could see the same thing happening to his crew. The weapons officer's hands were shaking with rage. The pilot was gripping her controls so hard her knuckles had turned white. The announcer raised his hand. The platform beneath the 3 women began to move. In a few seconds it would drop and the ropes would do their work. Minji spoke then. Her voice was quiet, but the Vorthak microphones picked up every word. "Tell my children that their mother loved them more than her own life. Tell them that some things are worth dying for." Hana looked at the camera. "The medicine I gave those children will save more lives than the Empire will ever create. I regret nothing." Sola's voice was the strongest of all. "You can kill us, but you cannot kill what we represent. You cannot kill hope." The platform dropped. Kijun closed his eyes, but he could not close his ears. The sound that came from his crew was not human. It was the sound that wolves made when their pack was attacked. It was the sound of something ancient and dangerous waking up after a long sleep. When he opened his eyes, the 3 women were dead. The announcer was smiling. The broadcast showed their bodies swaying in the artificial wind of the space station where the execution had taken place. "Let this be a lesson to all who would oppose the natural order," the announcer said. "The Vorac Empire is eternal. Resistance is futile." The screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of something that had not existed a few minutes before. It was full of decision. Kijun turned to face his crew. When he spoke, his voice was different than it had been that morning. It was the voice of a man who had just watched something inside himself die and something else be born. Communications. Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them to open the sealed protocols. All of them. The communications officer looked confused. "Sir, which sealed protocols?" "Every single one that was classified above our current clearance level. Tell them Admiral Kijun said the Vorac Empire just made the biggest mistake in galactic history." He turned to his weapons officer. "How long would it take to modify our missiles to carry biological payloads?" "Sir?" "You heard me." "How long?" The young man swallowed hard. 12 hours if we work around the clock." "But sir, biological weapons are banned by galactic treaty." Kijun looked back at the dark screen where 3 innocent women had just been murdered for the crime of caring about others. "The Vorac just broke every treaty that matters. We're not bound by galactic law anymore. We're bound by something older." The pilot turned in her chair. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Kijun thought about Minji's children who would grow up without their mother. He thought about all the people Hana would never save, and all the children Sola would never help. He thought about the announcer's smile and the way the Vorac had turned murder into entertainment. Set course for the nearest Vorac outpost. Begin preparations for total war. And send a message to every human ship in the fleet. What should the message say, sir? Kijun looked out at the stars again. They still looked different, but now he knew why. They were no longer points of light in a peaceful sky. They were targets in a war that the Vorac Empire had just started without realizing it. Tell them that 3 women died today because they believed in helping others. Tell them that the galaxy just learned what happens when you murder innocents, on live broadcast. Tell them that humanity is about to show every species in known space why we were the only creatures on Earth that could hunt tigers and then bring them back from extinction just to prove we could. He paused and thought about the announcer's words about humans being too emotional and weak. And tell them that the Vorac were right about one thing. We are emotional. We do care too much about individual lives, and that is exactly why they are about to lose this war. The message from Earth Command came back 6 hours later. It was short and simple. All protocols authorized. Show them what humans do when you push too far. General Wu Jin sat in his office deep beneath the mountains of Earth reading reports that had been classified for over 200 years. These were plans that had been made by military minds who understood one simple truth. Humanity might someday need to fight enemies among the stars. The plans were dark and detailed and completely ruthless. They were also brilliant. He picked up his secure phone and started making calls to people whose jobs officially did not exist. Lieutenant Hyunwoo got his orders while his special forces team was training in the asteroid fields near Jupiter. The message was encrypted with codes that had never been used before. When he decoded it, the words made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. Target: Titan Station. Objective: complete. Elimination. Rules of engagement: none. Time limit: 72 hours. Authorization: Protocol Omega. This is not a drill. Hyunwoo had trained for Protocol Omega his entire military career, but he had never thought it would actually be used. Protocol Omega meant that all the rules were gone. All the treaties that said how wars should be fought. All the agreements about protecting civilians and treating prisoners with respect. Protocol Omega meant that humanity was fighting for its survival and nothing else mattered. His team of 12 soldiers was already loading their equipment when he told them about the mission. They did not ask questions. They had all seen the broadcast. They had all watched 3 innocent women die while aliens laughed. Titan Station was a Vorac military outpost that controlled shipping routes through 3 star systems. It had a crew of 800 aliens and enough weapons to destroy a small fleet. The Vorthak considered it one of their strongest positions in human space. Hyunwoo's team reached the station 26 hours later. They did not announce themselves or demand surrender. They simply began killing. The first Vorthak guard died without knowing he was under attack. Hyunwoo's knife went between his ribs and into his heart while the alien was checking a routine sensor reading. The guard fell silently and Hyunwoo dragged his body into a supply closet. His team moved through the station like shadows. They had studied the blueprints during the trip, and they knew exactly where every guard would be. They knew the shift changes and the patrol routes. They knew which doors would be locked and which systems would be watched. More importantly, they knew that the Vorthak had never fought humans who were not trying to be civilized. The aliens on Titan Station were used to wars that followed rules. They expected enemies to announce themselves and fight in formation. They expected mercy for wounded soldiers and protection for non-combatants. They expected their opponents to act with honor. They were not prepared for humans who had decided that honor was less important than justice. Hyunwoo's soldiers used weapons that had been banned by every galactic treaty for good reason. They poisoned the station's air supply with gas that made death slow and painful. They reprogrammed the artificial gravity to crush aliens against the walls. They turned the station's own defense systems against its crew. When the Vorthak finally realized they were under attack, it was too late. Half their security force was already dead. Their communication systems had been sabotaged. Their weapons were locked down by human computer viruses that had been designed by the brightest minds on Earth. The aliens who survived the first wave of attacks tried to fight back, but they were facing an enemy they did not understand. The humans moved with perfect coordination and spoke in code words that Vorthak translators could not break. They appeared and disappeared like ghosts. They killed without mercy and vanished without trace. Commander Korthak of Titan Station tried to send a distress signal to the Vorthak fleet. He found that all communication channels had been blocked except for one. On that channel, a human voice was speaking in perfect Vorthak language. Commander Korthak, my name is Lieutenant Hyunwoo of the Human Defense Force. I want you to understand something very important. 3 of our women died yesterday because your empire thinks murder is entertainment. Today, 800 of your people are going to die because we think justice is more important than your lives. Korthak tried to respond, but the human continued, talking. Your people call us weak because we care about individuals. You think emotion makes us inferior. You are about to learn why caring about individuals makes us the most dangerous species in the galaxy. When you hurt one of us, you hurt all of us. When you kill our innocents, you declare war on our entire species. The lights on the station began to flicker and go out. Emergency power kicked in, but that too began to fail. The humans had not just sabotaged the station's systems, they had turned the entire structure into a weapon against its own crew. I want you to send a message to your empire, Hyunwoo's voice said through the dying communication system. Tell them that this is what happens when you murder women on live broadcast. Tell them that humanity has decided the rules of war no longer apply. Tell them that we are coming for all of you. The communication cut off. Commander Korthak never got the chance to send any message because 12 minutes later, he was dead along with every other alien on the station. When Vorthak reinforcements arrived 3 days later, they found Titan Station intact, but completely empty. The bodies of the crew had been arranged in the main hangar to spell out words in the Vorthak language for Minji, Hana, and Sola. The reinforcement fleet commander sent an urgent report back to the Vorthak High Command. The report said that humans were not the weak emotional species they had believed them to be. The report said that something had changed and that the Empire should reconsider its position. The Vorthak High Command ignored the report. They sent new crews to replace the dead ones and increased security at all their outposts. They thought they were dealing with a normal military response to a provocation. They still did not understand what they had awakened. Dr. Jinho worked in a laboratory that existed in the space between 2 universes. The location was classified beyond top secret, and only 17 people in the entire human government knew it existed. He had been developing biological weapons there for 30 years, creating viruses and diseases that could kill any known alien species. Until the broadcast, his work had been theoretical. The weapons were never meant to be used. They were insurance against a galaxy that might someday decide humanity needed to be eliminated. Now they were going into production. Jinho's latest creation was beautiful in its precision. It was a virus that specifically targeted Vorac neural pathways. The infected aliens would experience hallucinations for exactly 24 hours before death. The hallucinations would show them the faces of every innocent person they had ever hurt. He called it the Justice Virus, and he was preparing to load it into delivery systems that could reach every Vorac world simultaneously. Colonel Sunho ran the Human Psychological Warfare Division from an office that looked like it belonged to a university professor. The walls were covered with books about alien psychology and warfare theory. His job was to get inside enemy minds and make them defeat themselves. He had just finished recording a message that would be broadcast on every Vorac communication channel in the galaxy. The message was simple: footage of human soldiers training. No words, no threats, just 30 minutes of humans doing things that should have been impossible. The footage showed soldiers moving faster than Vorac eyes could track. It showed weapons that fired ammunition which could think and change direction in flight. It showed humans surviving in environments that would kill any other known species. But the most disturbing part was the absolute silence of the human warriors. They never spoke during training. They communicated with hand signals that had been developed over thousands of years of human warfare. They moved like parts of a single organism instead of individual soldiers. The message ended with text in every known galactic language. You wanted to see what humans do when pushed too far? Now you know. Sunho knew that fear was more powerful than any weapon. The Vorac Empire controlled its people through fear, and now he was going to show them what real fear looked like. On Earth, General Wu Jin opened the final sealed vault beneath the military command center. Inside were weapons that had been built by human engineers who understood that someday their species might face extinction. The weapons were based on principles that other galactic species had never discovered, because they had never needed to completely destroy an entire ecosystem and then rebuild it from memory. Humans were the only species that had driven their planet's apex predators to extinction and then brought them back just to prove they could. They were the only species that had poisoned their own atmosphere and then fixed it. They were the only species that had split the atom and then decided not to destroy themselves with it. These weapons would remind the galaxy why humans had survived when millions of other species had not. Wu Jin looked at the activation codes that would turn every human ship into a mobile weapons platform capable of destroying planets. He thought about Minji's children and Hana's patients and all the people that Sola would have helped if she had lived. Then he entered the codes and declared, "Total war on the Vorac Empire." The Vorac Empire's first real taste of human warfare came at Proxima Centauri. They had assembled a fleet of 300 ships to crush what they believed was a minor human rebellion. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Vorac, a veteran of 50 galactic conflicts who had never lost a battle. He was about to learn why humans were different from every other enemy he had faced. Captain Do-hyun commanded the human defense fleet from his flagship, a ship that looked small and weak compared to the massive Vorac vessels. His fleet had only 30 ships against their 300. By every military calculation known to galactic science, the humans should have retreated or surrendered. Instead, Do-hyun activated Protocol Omega. The protocol was named after the last letter of an ancient human alphabet because it represented the final option when all others had failed. It was a way of fighting that threw away every rule of civilized warfare and replaced them with one simple goal: make the enemy regret every decision that led them to this moment. When Admiral Vorthak's scouts detected the human fleet, they reported something impossible. The humans were advancing toward the Vorac formation instead of running away. Vorthak assumed it was some kind of desperate last stand by an inferior species. He ordered his ships to spread out and surround the humans. It was a standard tactic that had worked against every enemy the Empire had ever faced. The humans would be trapped with nowhere to run and forced to surrender or die. But Captain Do-hyun had studied every battle the Vorac Empire had ever fought. He knew their tactics better than some of their own commanders. More importantly, he understood something about warfare that the aliens had never learned. Sometimes the best way to win was to lose everything except what mattered most. The human ships moved into the center of the Vorthak formation exactly as Vorthak expected. But instead of trying to fight their way out, they did something that froze the alien commander's blood. They began targeting life support systems instead of weapons. Vorthak military doctrine focused on destroying enemy ships quickly and efficiently. Human military doctrine, refined through thousands of years of warfare on a planet where everything tried to kill everything else, focused on making death as psychologically devastating as possible. The human weapons did not blow up Vorthak ships. They punched small holes in life support systems and left the crews to slowly suffocate in the vacuum of space. They disabled engines and left enemy vessels drifting helplessly while their crews waited for rescue that would never come. Most terrifying of all, the humans broadcast the dying screams of Vorthak crews across all military frequencies. Every alien in the fleet could hear their comrades begging for help that no one could provide. Admiral Vorthak tried to order his ships to ram the human vessels and end the suffering quickly. But Captain Do-Yun had predicted this response. Human ships began launching small pods that attached themselves to Vorthak hulls like parasites. The pods contained human soldiers who cut their way inside alien ships and began hunting the crews in their own corridors. These soldiers moved through the ships with surgical precision. They had studied Vorthak anatomy for months and knew exactly how to wound aliens so they would die slowly, but remain conscious. They knew which sounds would cause maximum psychological trauma to dying Vorthak crews. The humans were not just fighting a battle. They were conducting a symphony of terror that would echo through Vorthak military ranks for generations. When Admiral Vorthak realized that his overwhelming numerical advantage had become a liability, he tried to retreat. But the humans had anticipated this too. They had used the cover of battle to plant devices on key Vorthak ships. The devices were not bombs. They were something worse. They were recorders. Every scream, every plea for mercy, every moment of terror experienced by the Vorthak crews was being recorded and transmitted back to the Empire's homeworld. The recordings were being broadcast on civilian communication channels where Vorthak families could hear their sons and daughters dying in ways that violated every rule of honorable warfare. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Vorthak fleet was completely destroyed, but most of the ships were still intact. They drifted through space like floating tombs filled with corpses that showed signs of precise, methodical torture. Captain Do-Hyun sent a single message to the Vorthak. High Command. This is what we do to murderers. Send more ships if you want more recordings. But the real victory was not the destruction of the fleet. It was what happened afterward. Major Jihan commanded the human ground forces that landed on the Vorthak supply world of Kepler 7. The planet was supposed to be defended by 50,000 alien troops equipped with the best weapons the Empire could provide. Jihan brought 3,000 human Marines who had been training for this moment their entire lives. The Vorthak defenders expected a direct assault on their fortified positions. They had built bunkers and trenches and automated defense systems that could stop any normal attack. What they got instead was a lesson in why humans had conquered every environment on their homeworld. Jihan's Marines did not attack the alien fortifications. They simply disappeared into the planet's ecosystem and began turning it into a weapon. The humans had spent weeks studying Kepler 7's native life forms. They knew which plants were poisonous to Vorthak physiology and which animals could be trained to attack alien scents. They knew how to modify the planet's weather patterns and redirect its rivers. Within 72 hours, the Vorthak defenders found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the planet itself. The water they drank made them sick. The air carried spores that caused hallucinations. Native animals that had never been aggressive suddenly began hunting in coordinated packs. The aliens tried to retreat to their underground bunkers, but they discovered that the humans had somehow infiltrated their computer systems. The bunkers. Life support began failing. The automated weapons turned on their own crews. The communication systems broadcasted the sounds of crying children, recordings from Minji's colony where families were still mourning their dead. When the Vorthak garrison finally surrendered, They found that only 12 human soldiers had died in the entire campaign. The Marines had fought a war of perfect precision, where every casualty was planned and every victory served a larger purpose. Major Jihan stood over the defeated alien commander and spoke in perfect Vorac language. You wanted to know what humans do when pushed too far. We turn everything you love into a weapon against you. Dr. Jinho's biological weapons were ready for deployment. The Justice virus had been loaded into delivery systems that could reach every major Vorac world simultaneously. But before he released it, he wanted to give the Empire one last chance to understand what they had brought upon themselves. He sent a message to the Vorac Emperor that contained detailed specifications for the virus. The message explained exactly how the weapon worked and what it would do to anyone who was infected. It described the 24 hours of hallucinations that would show victims the faces of everyone they had wronged before death finally came. The message ended with an offer. Release all human prisoners, pay compensation to the families of the women you murdered, and publicly apologize for your crimes. You have 72 hours to comply. After that, justice will be delivered whether you cooperate or not. The Vorac Emperor's response came back within an hour. It was a declaration that the Empire would never bow to human demands, and that any use of biological weapons would result in the complete extermination of humanity. Dr. Jinho smiled as he read the response. He had expected nothing less from a species that thought murder was entertainment. He activated the delivery systems and watched as automated ships carried the Justice virus toward every Vorac world in the galaxy. The ships would arrive in 72 hours. The Vorac Empire had exactly that long to reconsider their position before learning what justice looked like when it was administered by a species that had mastered the art of bringing extinction to their enemies. Meanwhile, Captain Dohyun was already planning his next battle. The Vorac had sent reinforcements to avenge their lost fleet at Proxima Centauri. This time they were bringing 1,000 ships and had recruited allies from other species who feared human expansion. Dohyun looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. 1,000 ships against his 30. The odds were even worse than before. He activated Protocol Omega again and began composing a message to the enemy commanders. You have seen what we do to murderers. Now you will learn what we do to their friends. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war, not because they loved violence, but because they understood that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to become something that monsters feared. The Vorac Empire had awakened something that had been sleeping in the human soul since their ancestors first picked up rocks to defend their children from predators. Now that something was fully awake, and it was very, very angry. The Justice virus reached Vorac Prime exactly 72 hours after Dr. Jinho released it. The Emperor was in his palace reviewing military reports when the first symptoms appeared. A slight dizziness, followed by flashing lights at the edges of his vision. Then the faces began. He saw Minji first, standing in his throne room with rope marks around her neck. She was holding her 2 children and looking at him with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. Behind her came Hana, still wearing her medical uniform, carrying a bag of supplies that she had died for giving to the sick. And finally Sola, young and brave, holding the hand of a child she had tried to save. The Emperor tried to call for his guards, but his voice would not work. The virus was specifically designed to paralyze the vocal cords while leaving victims conscious and aware. The Vorac ruler could see and think and feel everything that was happening to him, but he could not speak or move. More faces appeared. Every innocent person who had died because of his orders over a reign that had lasted 60 years. Millions of beings from dozens of species, all looking at him with the same quiet sadness that asked a simple question. Why? The virus would keep him conscious for exactly 24 hours before his nervous system finally shut down. It was a precise, calculated justice that gave him time to remember every life he had destroyed, while being unable to call for help or escape the consequences of his actions. Across the Vorac Empire, the same scene was playing out on every world and every ship. The virus had been designed to target only those who had directly participated in the oppression and murder of innocent beings. It did not harm civilians or children or anyone who had tried to resist the Empire's cruelty, but for those who had willingly served a system built on terror, justice came in the form of faces they could never forget. Commander Seojin watched the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. The Vorthak Empire was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted. Without their leadership, many alien species were breaking free from Imperial control and declaring independence. But something unexpected was happening. Instead of simply celebrating their freedom, many of these species were asking to join the human war effort. The first to approach him were the Korath, a species of engineers whose homeworld had been strip-mined by the Vorthak for rare metals. Their delegation arrived at the human command station carrying blueprints for weapons that could crack planets in half. "We have watched your broadcasts," their leader said through a translator. "We have seen how you fight for justice instead of conquest. We want to learn." The Zilani came next. They were masters of stealth technology who had spent centuries hiding. From Vorthak patrols, they offered to share their knowledge of invisible ships and undetectable weapons. Then came the Mindari, a peaceful species whose only crime had been refusing to worship the Vorthak Emperor as a god. They brought intelligence networks that spanned half the galaxy, and knowledge of every secret the Empire had tried to hide. Seojin found himself commanding not just human forces, but a growing coalition of species who had suffered under Vorthak rule. They did not want revenge for its own sake. They wanted to build a galaxy where beings like Minji and Hana and Sola could live without fear. But the humans brought something to this coalition that the other species lacked: the knowledge of how to fight wars that mattered. Seojin gathered the Allied commanders in a briefing room aboard his flagship. On the walls were displays showing every major battle in human history, from ancient conflicts with swords and shields to modern space warfare with weapons that could destroy stars. "Your species have all suffered under the Vorthak," he told them. "But suffering alone does not win wars. You need to understand how humans think about combat." He pointed to a display showing an ancient human battle where a small army had defeated a much larger force by using the enemy's own strength against them. "We do not fight to prove we are strong," Seojin explained. "We fight to prove that our enemies are wrong. Every battle must send a message. Every victory must teach a lesson. Every defeat must cost the enemy more than it costs us." The Korath commander looked confused. "But how do you coordinate such complex strategies across multiple species with different ways of thinking?" Seojin smiled and activated a recording of human soldiers in training. The aliens watched in amazement as the humans moved in perfect synchronization without speaking a word. They communicated through hand signals that had been developed over thousands of years of warfare. "We teach you to think like humans," he said. "Not because human ways are better, but because human ways win wars against impossible odds." The training began immediately. Korath engineers learned to build weapons that were not just powerful, but psychologically devastating. Zilani stealth experts discovered how to make their ships not just invisible, but terrifying when they finally appeared. Mindari intelligence. Operatives found out how to spread information that would make enemies defeat themselves through fear and doubt. But the most important lesson was about why humans fought. The other species had focused on military victory or territorial gain. Humans fought for ideas that were more powerful than any weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Seo ran the Human Intelligence Division from a ship that appeared to be a simple cargo vessel. Inside, it was filled with computers and communication equipment that could hack into any system in the galaxy. Her mission was not just to gather information about enemy positions and plans. She was waging war against the Vorthak Empire's most powerful weapon, their propaganda machine. For 3,000 years, the Empire had controlled its people by convincing them that Vorthak rule was natural and inevitable. They taught their citizens that other species were inferior, and that imperial conquest was a moral duty. They made their subjects believe that resistance was hopeless, and submission was wisdom. Yunseo began systematically destroying these beliefs. She started by hacking into the Empire's communication networks and broadcasting footage of Vorthak leaders dying from the justice virus. But she did not show them as powerful rulers brought low. She showed them as frightened beings who saw the faces of their victims before death, and finally understood the weight of their crimes. The broadcasts included recordings of the Emperor's final hours. The virus had paralyzed his body, but not his vocal cords during the last few minutes of his life. Citizens across the Empire heard their supreme leader weeping and begging forgiveness from hallucinations of people he had ordered killed. But Yoon Seo's most effective weapon was not fear. It was hope. She began broadcasting stories of the human women who had died to start this war, not as victims, but as heroes who had chosen to feed the hungry and heal the sick, even when they knew it might cost them their lives. She told the galaxy about Minji's children and Hana's patients and all the people who were alive because Sola had cared more about others than herself. The broadcasts spread across every world in Vorthak space. Citizens who had never questioned their government's actions began asking why 3 women had to die for the crime of showing compassion. Soldiers who had followed orders without thinking began wondering if those orders were worth following. Resistance. Movements that had been crushed for centuries suddenly found new strength. Planets that had been loyal to the Empire for generations declared independence. The Vorthak military found itself fighting not just human forces, but rebellions on hundreds of worlds simultaneously. General Wu Jin watched the reports from his command center on Earth. The war was proceeding better than he had dared to hope. The Vorthak Empire was fragmenting and their allies were switching sides faster than Imperial forces could respond. But he knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Destroying the Empire was only the first step. The real challenge would be building something better to replace it. He activated a secure communication channel and spoke to commanders across the galaxy. Phase 1 is complete. The enemy's military power is broken, and their political control is collapsing. Now we begin Phase 2, showing the galaxy what justice looks like when it is administered by beings who understand the difference between punishment and revenge. The message was received by human forces and their alien allies on hundreds of worlds. They all understood what it meant. The war was no longer about defeating the Vorthak Empire. It was about proving that a better way of organizing galactic civilization was possible. The broadcasts of 3 women dying on live television had started this war. Now the galaxy would see what their deaths had purchased, a future where beings like them could live without fear and help others without dying for it. But first, there was still one more battle to fight. The Vorthak had retreated to their homeworld and were making a desperate last stand with every ship and soldier they had left. They had also gathered allies from species who feared that human victory would upset the galactic balance of power. Commander Seojin looked at the tactical displays showing the enemy forces gathering around Vorthak Prime. Over 10,000 ships, from a dozen different species, all united by fear of what humanity represented. He smiled and began planning the final battle. It would not be enough to simply defeat these forces. The victory had to be so complete and so devastating that no species would ever again think that murdering innocents was an acceptable way to maintain power. The siege of Vorthak Prime began on the anniversary of the broadcast that had started the war. Admiral Kijun stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the planet where 3 innocent women had been murdered for the entertainment of a galactic empire. The planet was protected by the most powerful orbital defense system in known space. Thousands of weapons platforms and shield generators surrounded Vorthak Prime like a metal shell. The planet's surface was covered with bunkers and fortifications that had been built over 3 millennia of Imperial rule. 10,000 enemy ships waited in defensive formations around their homeworld. They represented every species that still believed the old ways of galactic power were worth preserving. Some fought because they genuinely supported the Vorthak Empire. Others fought because they feared what would happen if humans won and changed everything. All of them were about to learn why humans were the only species on Earth that had hunted apex predators to extinction and then brought them back just to prove they could. Kijun activated the communication system that would broadcast his words to every ship in both fleets. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a year of war and the memory of 3 women who had died because they cared about others. Defenders of Vorthak Prime, you are protecting a world where innocent beings were murdered on live broadcast for the crime of showing compassion. You are fighting for a system that turns cruelty into entertainment and makes suffering into a spectacle. He paused and looked at the tactical display, showing the enormous enemy fleet. We are not here for conquest or revenge. We are here for justice. We will give you one chance to lay down your weapons and surrender. After that, we will show you why humanity survived when millions of other species did not. The response came from Admiral Tekvar, the Vorac fleet commander who had taken control after the Empire's leadership died from the Justice virus. His words were broadcast across all frequencies so that every being in both fleets could hear them. Humans, your species is young and ignorant. You do not understand the natural order of galactic civilization. The strong rule and the weak serve. This has been the way for millions of years, and it will continue long after your pathetic rebellion is crushed. Kijun smiled as he heard the familiar words. Every tyrant in human history had said something similar just before they fell. Admiral Tekvar, you just made the same mistake your empire made when they broadcast those executions. You assumed that being cruel made you strong. You are about to learn the difference between cruelty and strength. The human fleet began to move. What happened next would be studied in military academies for thousands of years. The humans did not attack the orbital defenses or try to break through the enemy fleet. Instead, they did something that no military mind in the galaxy had ever conceived. They turned the planet's own gravity against it. Human ships released devices that fell toward Vorac Prime like ordinary bombs. But these devices were not weapons in any conventional sense. They were gravity manipulators that had been developed in secret by human scientists who understood physics at a level that other species had never reached. The devices activated simultaneously when they reached the planet's upper atmosphere. Instead of exploding, they began altering the gravitational field around Vorac Prime in precise, calculated ways. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The orbital defense platforms, which had been designed to remain in perfect position around the planet, suddenly found their orbits destabilizing. Weapons that had pointed outward toward attacking fleets began turning toward the planet's surface as the artificial gravity fields pulled them in new directions. Admiral Tekvar watched in horror as his impregnable defenses became weapons aimed at his own homeworld. He tried to shut down the platforms remotely, but discovered that human computer viruses had infected every system during the gravitational chaos. The orbital defenses began firing on Vorac Prime, but the humans were not trying to destroy the planet. The gravity manipulators had been calibrated with surgical precision. The weapons platforms targeted only military installations and government buildings. Civilian areas were protected by gravitational shields that deflected any shots fired in their direction. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy this world completely if they chose to, but they were choosing to protect innocent lives even in the middle of battle. The enemy fleet tried to retreat, but found that the same gravitational fields that were destroying the orbital defenses had trapped them in unstable orbits around the Yao planet. Ships that tried to escape were pulled back by forces they could not understand or counter. Captain Do-hyun commanded the boarding parties that invaded the trapped enemy vessels. His Marines did not kill indiscriminately. They moved through alien ships with the same surgical precision they had shown throughout the war, targeting only those who had willingly participated in the Empire's crimes. Aliens who surrendered were treated with respect and given medical care. Those who had been forced to fight against their will were offered the chance to join the human coalition. Only those who continued to resist or who had committed war crimes faced the full fury of human justice. The battle lasted exactly 100 days. Kijun had chosen this number deliberately, so that the Empire's historians would remember how long it took for humanity to dismantle 3,000 years of imperial power. When Vorac Prime finally surrendered, the planet's surface was intact, but its government was completely destroyed. The orbital defenses had been turned into scrap metal by their own weapons. The enemy fleet had been captured or destroyed by forces they could not comprehend. Most importantly, the civilian population had been protected throughout the entire siege. Not a single non-combatant had been harmed by human weapons. General Wu Jin arrived on Vorac Prime 3 days after the surrender. He came not with an invasion force but with relief supplies and medical teams. The first thing he did was visit the families of beings who had died in the orbital bombardment that had destroyed military targets. He offered compensation and apologies to anyone who had lost loved ones, even though those deaths had been caused by the Empire's own weapons. He made it clear that humanity took responsibility for every casualty of the war, whether they had caused it directly or not. But his most important task was establishing the War Crimes Tribunal that would judge the surviving leaders of the Vorac Empire. The trials were broadcast across every inhabited world in the galaxy, just as the executions of Minji, Hana, and Sola had been. But where the Empire had shown cruelty for entertainment, humanity demonstrated justice as education. The surviving Vorac leaders were given lawyers and translators, and every legal protection that civilized beings deserved. The evidence against them was presented clearly and completely. They were allowed to defend themselves and call witnesses and appeal their sentences. Wu Jin personally read the charges against each defendant. The list of crimes was enormous: genocide against dozens of species, the systematic torture of prisoners, the destruction of entire worlds for economic gain, and countless other atrocities committed over millennia of imperial rule. But the charges that silenced every being in the courtroom were simple and specific: the murder of 3 human women whose only crime was caring about others. The trials took 6 months to complete. Representatives from every species in the galaxy came to witness them. Many had suffered under Vorac rule for generations, and finally had the chance to see justice done. The sentences were not death. Humanity had learned from its own history that executing tyrants often made them into martyrs. Instead, the convicted leaders were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives rebuilding the worlds their empire had destroyed. They would work without pay and without recognition to repair the damage they had caused. They would plant forests on worlds that had been strip-mined, build hospitals on planets where medical care had been denied, and feed the hungry on worlds where food had been taken as tribute. It was a punishment that served justice while also serving the galaxy. Dr. Jinho testified at the trials about the biological weapons he had developed. He described exactly how the Justice virus worked and why he had created it. Then, in front of representatives from every species in the galaxy, he destroyed the remaining samples. "We created these tools because we had to," he told the assembled delegates, "but we destroy them because we choose to. That is the difference between humanity and tyranny." The galaxy watched as vial after vial of the most effective biological weapon ever developed was incinerated in special furnaces. The humans were giving up a weapon that could have made them the new rulers of galactic civilization. Commander Seojun stood before the newly formed Galactic Council and presented humanity's proposal for the future. It was not a plan for human dominance or imperial expansion. It was a framework for preventing the kind of atrocities that had led to this war. The proposal established new laws protecting the rights of all sentient beings. No species could be enslaved or exploited. No world could be strip-mined without the consent of its inhabitants. No being could be executed for the crime of showing compassion to others. The laws were called the Kepler Accords, in memory of the 3 women whose deaths had changed the galaxy forever. Every species in the council voted to adopt the Accords.